We have a little section of an absolutely incredible interview here today. This is about, this segment of the interview is about the value proposition of ETH as an asset. This is a great interview. I suggest you watch the full thing. I'm going to do a few videos just breaking down small sections of it if the full thing is too much for you to take in at one time. But super, highly recommend that you watch this. All right, let's check it out.
Let's talk a little bit more about price, and maybe not in the sort of the months range.
This guy's a professor too. He's an expert in the field, so
in kind of the years range, because I think even some of the ETH bears, Ethereum bears, I would say, would concede. I mean, okay, yeah, the metrics look great. Layer 2 is going just fine. The roll-up centric roadmap, apparently it seems to work. But whoopsie, there's a problem there.
Oh, by the way, none of this financial advice. I'm a cartoon monkey, so take that for what it's worth. I am not an Ethereum bag holder. I do have some Ethereum, not much. It's just really for transactions, for other tokens on chain. The majority of Ethereum I sold off a while ago. I wasn't so bullish on it, although I do like what this guy says. So let's hear it.
L2s are actually parasitic. They're parasitic to not Ethereum necessarily in the idea of a network, but they're parasitic to Ether, the asset. You take all of the DeFi off of the Fedwire and you sort of like move that up into the kind of the higher layers, the layer 2s and the layer 3s, then what's the value proposition for Ether, the asset? And so
just to clarify, so if you're like doing any swaps or trading or DeFi on Base, you're not actually doing, Ethereum's not getting any fees from you utilizing Base chain or any other layer 2. So that's the idea, is that the layer 2s are parasitic, meaning they're stealing value from the base layer of Ethereum.
Ask you this because I think you've got some insights into Ether the asset and why is Ether the asset valuable? Can you talk about that? And I think you've used this word or this term HQLA, high quality, I think, liquid asset. Maybe talk about that, and you'll give us some analogs in the TradFi world.
Yeah, sure. First of all, as I tell my students, much to their chagrin, not investment advice. I have no idea what ETH is going to do next week or next year.
I bet they ask you, though, all the time.
Oh,
like, give us the token picks.
They're very disappointed. And then I once got booed by my own students because I had a guest speaker. And one of the students was like, hey, the professor never tells us what to buy, but can you tell us what to buy? And I just cut it off, right? I'm like, sorry, we can't talk about that. And the whole class was like, boo.
How many of your students will be listening to this podcast, though?
I'm going to send it to them because, like I said, I'm a big fan of the show. Yeah. So I have to be careful here and not share the cat meme coin that I think is the next $1 trillion asset. I'm kidding.
Most elegant monkey ever. Check it out.
HQLA. So yeah, this is a term I borrowed from TradFi. And the reason why is that if we're going to build a better, more decentralized financial system, we need a really good asset to build it on top of. This is just how all financial systems always work, whether it was gold at some point, it's probably US Treasuries now.
Right.
HQLA, this is actually a regulatory designation post 2008 for like how much treasuries and treasury-like things banks need to hold. But it's high quality as in like universally recognized as valuable. There's not a lot of credit risk or default risk. And then liquid as in like if you have a lot of it or somebody else has a lot of it and they have to sell, it's not going to kill the price. The market can absorb that. And I think DeFi needs this. I think DeFi needs a HQLA asset for you to have borrowing, lending, leverage, more decentralized stable coins, better perps, right? Like if you're trading perps, I mean, a lot of them use a stable coin. But what happens if like the US government and the federal regulators who are now very against most crypto go after Circle and say, like, we don't want USDC used as an enabler of this illegal perp market or poly market or something. Like it's a risk that we have to, like today's okay. I don't think it's going to happen tomorrow, but if we're going to build the global financial system on top of in DeFi, we can't take that risk. So we need an asset. And the first candidate for like the crypto native HQLA is Bitcoin.
Obviously.
Don't want to get into a Bitcoin versus
I think that's obvious.
ETH debate, but it's more valuable and it's more liquid. It's significantly.
Look at these guys' faces. These guys up top, they are ETH bulls. The whole podcast is about ETH, so that's not super exciting for them to hear.
Liquid. I don't think anybody disagrees with that. The problem with Bitcoin is you can't do anything with it natively. So if you want to use it as collateral or to trade perps and stuff like that, you can only do that in a trusted fashion. You have to, actually lend your Bitcoins to somebody or like deposit it at a crypto exchange. Maybe someday Bitcoin.
So currently, anything you're going to do with Bitcoin, if you want to do a like if I'm going to buy a house and I want to put in escrow or something, there's no decentralized way to put it into escrow. Although maybe you can do that with Thorchain or Rune. I'm not sure. But at least it's not native to the chain itself. So that's where his strength with Ethereum is coming into play.
L2s will work and we'll have stable coins on Build 2 and then we can revisit this conversation. But for now, it can't be Bitcoin.
Right. So I interrupted that part. So assuming that the L2s do not work for Bitcoin, that there is no other things built on Bitcoin, which I think they're going to happen. But let's assume that doesn't happen, then the rest of this statement becomes more of a reality.
Which means the AQLA asset really has to be the L1, the token of a L1 smart contract platform. It's not going to be a dApp token. It's not going to be a governance token. It's not going to be a L2 token. I think we all know why, in terms of how they're just not as secure, not as liquid, too much governance risk, etc. And ultimately today, it comes down to ETH versus Sol, because there's no other L1 smart contract blockchain token that's close to these two in terms of value, as in like market cap, liquidity, or even decentralization.
I'm curious, in this interview, Cardano or ADA is never brought up at all. Now, I haven't been paying attention to development on that chain, so maybe there's a clear reason, but I do need to do some more research on that. If you guys know, let me know what's going on with Cardano. Why is it not being put in the same category? Obviously, the locked value is not there, and maybe that's the case.
And when I wrote that post, I really thought about it. I was like, ETH just wins on multiple metrics. Let's go through it, right? One is that ETH ownership is pretty widely distributed, certainly more than Solana or Sol, because Ethereum launched as a proof of work blockchain for years, and proof of work is much better at distribution of ownership than proof of stake. It's just a fact of life. It's really hard to launch a new proof of stake chain, because how do you get tokens into the hands of the people who are going to stake and not have them be like just a handful of VCs and insiders and the foundations? I actually don't know what the answer to that question is, but I think it's a problem. Ethereum skipped all that because it was a proof of work chain. So the distribution is good. The foundation barely owns any. Also good. There's no affiliated labs that has influence or control on the network or owns significant tokens. That's good for HQLA. It's bad for other things. Like if there was an Ethereum Incorporated that had more money, they could fund more things and do more grants or whatever, but trade-offs. ETH is more widely held than Sol. It's more liquid than Sol. It has lower inflation. And that's important for this conversation because inflation is like the cost of capital for DeFi.
I mean, in my mind, Sol is not even an option. It's not as decentralized, and it breaks at times. It's not. You need something stable. In terms of smart contract platforms, Ethereum is the most stable, the strongest one out there. So there's no question at this stage of the game. It's ETH for this situation he's giving, for the example he's giving.
If you own ETH and you want to go and use it in Aave, you're going to forego staking yield. But it's not. That's okay. Right? Because you're foregoing like 3-4%, but you're not being diluted.
That's actually not necessarily true because I have staked Ether in Aave right now. And so I'm accruing the staking yield of the Ethereum protocol as my collateral deposit inside of Aave. Now I'm using a less liquid derivative than I am of Ether itself, but I am getting the yield.
Yeah.
If you're unaware of what he's talking about, so he has Ethereum staked, which he's collecting interest on, and then he's taking that staked Ethereum and getting like a token that represents the staked Ethereum and then putting that into Aave and then collecting interest on that staked Ethereum. So he's getting double interest in a way.
Obviously, if you have like Lido stake ETH or Rocket Poolers, but you're taking more risk.
Right.
Like all else being equal, Lido stake ETH, which I also own, by the way, has some risk. It's not a risk-free thing to go through a staking provider, and it's less liquid.
I think people don't realize that too. Like, I typically stay away from DeFi. I played that game last cycle. I don't play it this. I just hold. The stuff I believe in, I hold. I don't stake it because there is risk in staking. There's smart contract risk. There's platform risk. I don't want to lose my bag. So I can negate the 5% interest or 3% interest, which I can occur with some tokens or some situations, and I'll just hold for the price appreciation. For my long-term holds, I want as risk-free or the least risk as possible.
And the challenge in Solana is that Solana has a lot more inflation. So that means it's naturally going to have a higher staking participation rate. So there's less of it around. I think Solana's staking participation rate is double Ethereum's.
Yeah, it's like 75% or something.
Yeah, which I mean, it's like 5 point something percent inflation. You'd be crazy not to. And it's easier because they have delegation of staking. But the cost of capital for DeFi is real. And I actually looked this morning. Like if you go on Aave right now, native ETH, you can, the deposit borrow rate's like 2.5%. Native Sol in Solana DeFi is like 5-6%, which makes sense, right? Because if you're going to lend out your Sol on Camino natively, well, you're not staking it. You're not making 5%. So people are going to have to pay you more than that in order for you to make your asset available as collateral in DeFi. So what this means to put it...
If you're not following this, so Solana has a higher inflation rate. So if you want me to stake my Solana and not have the ability to sell at any time, you're going to have to pay me a higher interest rate to factor in the inflation that's occurring. Because I don't want to be staking and not keeping up with the rate of inflation that's coming out on the chain. So that's the difference, where Ethereum has a lower inflation rate, therefore it can take a lower interest rate, where Solana has a higher inflation rate. So you have to pay me higher interest if you want me to stake.
Finance nerd terms is that the nominal yield for Sol is higher than ETH, and that's actually problematic because you're competing with staking for DeFi. And then the ultimate thing, and this is where it gets really like interesting and ironic, is that Ethereum has higher fees, and that's good for HQLA consideration, because we always think of fees as being a cost to users, which it is, but it's a revenue to stakers. In Ethereum, because inflation is very low, but fees are actually high, you have a very positive real yield, right? Like, so just to review, the real yield is the actual yield you earn in any currency above the inflation rate.
Right.
And in Ethereum, it's actually a pretty impressive thing that it's like currently in the 3 to 4% range. I guess, well, we subtract inflation, it'll be like 2.5. But then when activity is high, the real yield is even higher. And then you have a burn mechanism. There's a few other nuances that, like, if ETH has a higher convenience yield for the same reason, people want to hold more of it to pay future gas fees compared to Solana. So ironically, if your fees are too low, then, and your inflation is too high, which every single one of these high performance chains is going to have that problem. One, they're young, and two, if your state validation requires sophisticated hardware and expensive bandwidth, you have to pay people for that, right? It becomes a little bit actually like how proof of work works, which is like proof of work, all else being equal, always need more inflation than proof of stake because you got to pay the miners. They got high electric bills and hardware costs. So Solana and all the other high performance chains are going to have this problem where they're going to have negative real yield for the foreseeable future. Now, to be fair, Solana inflation ratchets down every year. And even though they keep optimizing the network to maintain low transaction costs, maybe there's enough demand that shows up that in aggregate, stakers end up earning more. But for now, as far as like a pure asset that people want to hold and use as collateral for financial activity across all of crypto, to me, ETH is the standalone HQLA.
For HQLAs, I want to ask about just what doors open up for the assets that cross the chasm into being an HQLA. There are
HQLA, high quality liquid asset.
opportunities that are open to assets that have this status versus others that don't. What are those opportunities, and how does it kind of create like a feedback loop of the nature of the HQLA?
So ultimately, it comes down to the fact that it's an asset that people want to hold today because there's more you can do with it today and tomorrow. So going back to the TradFi context, like the reason why everybody in the world wants to hold US Treasuries, because that's the HQLA, is one, they sort of trust the US government, they trust the Fed, they don't think we're going to have like runaway inflation. But two, there's just so much you can do with it. Like if you have a Treasury bond and you need to sell it, you can sell it. You can sell a lot of it and you're barely going to move the market. Or you can borrow against it, right? So there's this massive, it's called the repo market, where trillions of dollars a day, where there are people who are literally like, I have a Treasury bond, I need dollars till tomorrow. Here, you get my bond, I get your dollars, interest exchanged. And
so if you're unaware, in the current financial system, the bonds, the Treasury bonds, is the HQLA. It is the asset that is basically equal to $1. It is seen as almost the same thing, basically $1 with interest attached to it. And you could swap out a Treasury bond for $1 instantly for very little loss. And that's what he's talking about with the repo market, where the banks don't typically hold dollars. They typically hold Treasury bonds because they want to collect the interest, whatever interest it is. And if they ever need dollars, they can trade or they can lend their Treasury bonds to the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve would give them dollars, and at any time they can swap it back. And it's super easy, super fast, because it is a high quality liquid asset.
it's great collateral. Like you want to do a deal, you need to put money in escrow. You want a bank to put on some kind of a structured levered product for you. So bringing it back to the crypto context, I think as institutions come into it, and this is how institutions think, right? Like individuals tend to think like, what chain do I like? What coin do I like? What's going to go up more next week or next year? But when institutions come in that have these 5-10 year horizons, they're going to want some Bitcoin because that's the world's backup money. But then they're going to be like, man, I can't do anything with this Bitcoin, right? Like I can lend it, but how am I going to lend it? I have to go through an intermediary. It's no longer as decentralized.
Yeah, you can lend a Bitcoin ETF pretty well.
Yeah, that's a good point. And people will. But again, it's like you're taking multiple layers of trust assumptions, both with the ETF issuer. And frankly, like not everybody, you need a brokerage account in a developed country, mainly the US, to get access to the ETFs. There are ETFs in other countries, but do we trust the issuer? Yada, yada, yada. So these institutions, I think, are going to be like ETH. Obviously, they want to go long crypto. Like that's a requirement. But they're like, hey, ETH is special because it's actually a very rare thing that even US Treasuries don't have, which is it's borderline deflationary in terms of total supply. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. But it pays interest. And I think a lot of institutions are going to say, I want to hold this because like, well, today I'm earning yield and I'm not being diluted via inflation. That's good. But then tomorrow, if I need to sell it, I can. If I need to borrow dollars or Swiss francs against it, I can. If I want to go to another financial institution that believes in crypto and say, hey, I want a loan, I want you to do a derivative trade for me, they will accept my ETH as collateral.
With United States like treasuries and other very liquid bonds, there's this notion of cash and cash-like instruments, and these cash-like instruments are effectively treated like...
We're going to end it there. This next segment is going to go into about ETH, about money. But I think this is probably the most bullish thing I've heard for Ethereum as an asset. I can understand this completely, but again, this is assuming that L2s on Bitcoin do not succeed and they do not increase at all. And if they do, then that's kind of it for ETH as an asset in this situation. One thing to be aware of or to think about, though, is these banks or these large institutions that will be looking for these HQLAs, high quality liquid assets, is they're not looking for price appreciation. They're looking for basically price stability. So this is not a bullish case for Ethereum pumping. This is a case for Ethereum when it gets to a certain market cap being used as a high quality liquid asset. Because right now, Ethereum's not big enough for banks to be using it in that fashion. The market cap's tiny. So it's not going to be an effective solution for them. It'll be effective solution for maybe some VCs or smaller entities, but not banks as we're discussing in this situation. So this only happens if Ethereum pumps to a certain level and then can be considered a HQLA. Anyway, super fantastic interview. This guy is amazing speaker, very clear speaker. I love it. Highly recommend you watch the whole thing. I'm going to break down some more segments. I'm going to do this one, ETH is Money's next. So if you just want to hear my perspective on it, make sure you subscribe to the channel. If you like what I do, you want to support my work, I'll put a Bitcoin address down below. If you're into meme coins, check out Most Elegant Monkey Ever. It's my favorite coin right now. I think it's the highest risk reward on the table. And until next time, stay elegant.